The night my father called me a thief, he didn't yell. He just looked at me the way you look at a stranger who broke into your house, and that was worse than any scream could have been. It started with an envelope, $6,000 in cash, sitting inside my grandmother's old cedar box on the top shelf of my parents' closet. Money she'd left specifically for my college tuition, the kind of money nobody touches unless it's an emergency. My mother went to get it on a Tuesday afternoon to pay a deposit at the community college, and it was gone. Not moved, not misplaced. Gone. I was 19, living at home to save money, working part-time at a hardware store on weekends, and taking classes during the week. I didn't even know the envelope existed until that day, when my mother stood in the kitchen holding the empty cedar box like it had personally betrayed her. "Where is it?" she said, not a question, a demand dressed up as one. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. She didn't believe me. I watched her decide not to believe me in real time, the way her face closed off, the way her arms crossed like a locked door. My father came home an hour later, and the story had already changed shape in her mouth. By the time he heard it, it wasn't, "The money is missing." It was, "Your daughter took it." I want to be clear about something before I go further. I did not take that money. I need you to sit with that, because everything that happens next only makes sense if you believe me, and for a long time, nobody in my own family did. My name is Reagan. I have an older brother named Caleb, 23 at the time, who had recently moved back in with us after what my parents called a rough patch, and what I later learned was several rough patches stacked on top of each other. Caleb had always been the one people rooted for. Charming, funny, the kind of guy teachers remembered fondly years after he graduated. I loved him. I want that on the record too, because loving someone and being destroyed by them aren't mutually exclusive, no matter what anyone tells you. That first night, my parents sat me down at the dining table like it was an interrogation room. My mother's eyes were red. My father's jaw kept flexing like he was chewing on words he refused to say out loud. "You've been asking about tuition costs for weeks," my mother said. "You knew exactly where that money was." "I asked because I'm scared about paying for school," I said. "That doesn't mean I stole from you." "Then who did?" my father asked. And when I looked at Caleb, sitting at the end of the table with his arms folded and his eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table, he just shook his head slowly, like he felt sorry for me, like he pitied the position I'd put myself in. That's the part that still gets me. He didn't deny it was possible I did it. He didn't defend me. He just let the silence sit there and do the work for him. Nobody found the money that night. Nobody found it the next night either. And somewhere in the space between those two nights, my parents stopped asking whether I did it and started operating like they already knew the answer. I need to back up for 1 second, because there's a detail here that matters more than it seems like it should. About 2 months earlier, a package had gone missing off our porch. Nothing valuable, just a set of kitchen towels my mother ordered, but it annoyed her enough that she asked our neighbor, Mrs. Halloway, if she could angle her doorbell camera slightly toward our side of the shared driveway. Mrs. Halloway agreed. Nobody thought about that camera again after the towels turned up on the wrong doorstep 3 houses down. It just sat there, quietly recording our shared driveway and part of our side door, uploading footage to a cloud account nobody was checking. I didn't know that detail mattered yet. Neither did anyone else. It was just a small, forgettable fact sitting in the background of my life, the way small facts do right before they become the only thing that matters. The week after the money disappeared, things at home turned cold in a way I didn't know a house could get. My mother stopped making my plate at dinner. My father started locking his home office door, which he'd never done before. And Caleb, my brother, my supposed ally, started acting like a man walking carefully around a hole in the floor that only he could see. I tried talking to him alone. I caught him in the garage one night while he was pretending to look for something in his car. You know I didn't do this, I said. He didn't look at me right away. I know things are hard for you right now, he said, which wasn't an answer at all. It was a sentence built entirely out of avoiding one. That's not what I asked you. Reagan, I can't control what Mom and Dad think. You could tell them the truth. His head snapped up at that, just for a second, something flickering behind his eyes that I couldn't name yet. Then it was gone, replaced by that same practiced, patient expression he used on everyone. The truth is the money's missing and nobody knows where it went, he said. That's the truth I know. I left the garage feeling like I'd been handed a puzzle with half its pieces missing on purpose. 3 weeks after the accusation, my parents asked me to move out. They didn't phrase it that harshly. My mother used the words, some space, and my father used the words, until trust can be rebuilt. Like trust was a bridge you could just schedule construction crews to fix. But underneath the soft language was a simple fact. They believed their son over their daughter, and they wanted me gone until I confessed to something I never did. I stayed with my friend Priya for the first 2 weeks, sleeping on an air mattress in her studio apartment, working extra shifts at the hardware store to cover what I could, watching my college plans quietly dissolve, because the only proof I had that I hadn't touched that tuition money was my own word. And my own word had stopped being enough for the people who were supposed to trust it most. I want to tell you the anger came first, but it didn't. Confusion came first. Then a specific kind of grief, the kind you feel for people who are still alive but have stopped being who you thought they were. Then, slowly, underneath all of it, something harder started to grow. Not exactly anger, more like resolve. Somewhere around week 5 of living out of a duffel bag, I stopped trying to convince my parents and started trying to figure out who actually took the money. Because if I didn't do it, someone did, and that someone was letting me lose my family in their place. I thought about Caleb constantly, not because I wanted it to be him, but because he was the only other person with regular access to that closet, and because of the way he'd avoided my eyes in the garage that night. I started paying closer attention on the rare occasions I still saw him, at my grandmother's birthday lunch, at a cousin's graduation party. He'd bought a new watch. Nothing flashy, nothing that would catch most people's eyes, but I noticed it because I noticed everything about him now, the way you study a photograph looking for the thing that's slightly wrong. I asked him about it, casually, at the graduation party. New watch. Birthday gift to myself, he said, too fast, like the answer had been sitting ready in his mouth before I even finished the question. His birthday was in October. It was June. I didn't say anything else. I filed it away, the same place I was filing every small, strange detail that didn't add up, building a case I didn't yet know how to prove. Here's where I have to tell you about Marcus, my father's younger brother, because he becomes important later, and I don't want you thinking he came out of nowhere. Marcus worked in IT for a security company, the same one, as it turned out, that managed the cloud storage for Mrs. Halloway's doorbell camera. He and I had always been close, closer than I was with my own father in a lot of ways, because Marcus never made you feel like you were being evaluated when you talked to him. I called him about 4 months into all this, mostly just to have one adult in the family who still picked up the phone when I called. "How's the case going?" he asked, half joking, because by then everyone in the family had started calling it the case, like we were living inside a courtroom drama instead of a falling-apart household. "Nowhere," I said. "I know Caleb's hiding something, I can't prove it." There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause where you can hear someone thinking. "You know Diane still has that doorbell camera pointed at your driveway, right?" he said. Diane was Mrs. Halloway's first name. I'd genuinely forgotten she even had one until that moment. I sat up straight on Priya's air mattress, like someone had run an electric current through it. "The one from the package thing." "That one, it's been recording this whole time. Nobody ever turned it off. They just stopped checking it because the towel thing got resolved. Most people don't realize these things keep saving footage to the cloud for months unless someone actively deletes it. I didn't sleep that night. I kept doing the math in my head, counting backward to the date the money went missing, wondering if a camera pointed at a shared driveway could have caught anything useful about a theft that happened inside a closet, inside a house, nowhere near where that camera could see. The answer, it turned out, was yes, just not in the way I expected. Getting access to that footage took weeks of careful, quiet effort, because I couldn't just march up to Mrs. Halloway and demand it without explaining why, and I wasn't ready to drag a 70-year-old widow into my family's unraveling. Marcus, bless him, found a legitimate way in. Mrs. Halloway's camera system was managed through his company's platform, and after some gentle, honest conversation with her about double-checking something for insurance purposes, she agreed to let him pull footage from a specific window of dates, the 3 days surrounding when my mother discovered the money missing. We watched it together on his laptop, in his kitchen, on a Sunday afternoon, while my father thought I was still at Priya's and had no idea I was 2 miles away, tearing his version of events apart frame by frame. Most of the footage was nothing. Cars pulling in and out, the mail carrier, a raccoon that apparently visited nightly like it paid rent. Then, on the second night, time-stamped just after 11 p.m., the side door of our house opened. It was Caleb. He walked out to his car carrying something small, tucked against his side, glancing back at the house twice before he got in and drove off. The footage wasn't perfect. The angle was wide, and the porch light cast long shadows, but you could see enough. You could see a young man who looked exactly like someone trying very hard not to look like he was doing anything wrong. "That doesn't prove he took the money," Marcus said carefully, "because he's the kind of person who tells you the truth even when you don't want to hear it. It proves he left the house late at night carrying something." He was right, and I knew he was right, and it made me furious anyway because I finally had something, and something felt like it should have been enough. I didn't confront Caleb right away. I sat with the footage for almost a week, watching it over and over, trying to figure out what I was actually looking at. And then I remembered something my mother had said, weeks earlier, in the middle of one of the worst fights we'd had. She'd mentioned, almost as an aside, that Caleb had been having some money trouble before he moved back in, something about a friend who'd gotten him into online poker, something he'd apparently paid off before it became a problem. Paid off with what? I called Priya over that night, and we mapped it out on her kitchen table like two detectives in a movie neither of us would have chosen to star in. Caleb moves back home in February, broke, according to my mother, from gambling debt he's supposedly already resolved. New watch appears in June. Birthday excuse doesn't hold up. Money disappears in July. Caleb leaves the house late at night, carrying something small, 2 nights after the money goes missing. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even close to proof a courtroom would accept. But it was enough for me to walk back into my parents' house for the first time in 4 months and ask for one thing: a real conversation, with Caleb in the room and the footage on the table. My mother didn't want to let me in at first. I remember standing on the porch, the same porch that the camera had been watching this whole time without any of us knowing it mattered, and telling her through the screen door that I had something she needed to see, and if she still didn't believe me after seeing it, I would leave and never bring any of it up again. She let me in. We sat at that same dining table where I'd first been accused, except this time I was the one asking the questions. I played the footage on my phone. I laid out the timeline, the debt, the watch, the late-night drive. My father watched the whole thing with his hands pressed flat against the table like he was trying to keep it from tipping over. Caleb didn't deny it right away. He sat very still, staring at the paused frame of himself walking out that door, and for a long moment, nobody said anything at all. "It's not what it looks like," he finally said, which is what people say right before it turns out to be exactly what it looks like. "Then tell us what it is," my father said, and his voice had a crack in it I'd never heard before, not once in 19 years. Caleb's story came out in pieces, the way stories do when someone's been building the lie for months and has to take it apart in real time. The gambling debt had never actually gone away. He'd told our parents it was resolved because he was ashamed, and because a friend had loaned him enough to make the worst of it disappear temporarily. A loan that came with the kind of interest that isn't legal and isn't polite to ask about too closely. When the friend came calling again in July, Caleb didn't have the money. He knew about the cedar box because he'd seen my mother put the envelope there months earlier, back before any of us knew it would matter. He took it. He paid off the debt. And when the theft was discovered, he let the silence in that garage do exactly what he needed it to do, because it was easier to let his little sister take the fall than to admit, one more time, that he'd failed. My mother made a sound I don't think I can accurately describe, something between a sob and a word that never fully formed. My father just kept saying, "Why?" over and over, not really asking Caleb, more like asking the room, the house, the last 4 months. I sat there and I did not feel the relief I thought I'd feel. I'd spent months imagining this exact moment, imagining vindication tasting like victory. It didn't. It tasted like grief with the truth finally attached to it. Here's where the story usually would end, if this were the kind of story that ends neatly. Family finds out the truth, apologizes to the wrongly accused daughter, everyone hugs, credits roll. That's not what happened, and I think it's important I tell you the part that came after, because that part is the one that actually changed how I think about my family. My mother apologized. Genuinely, painfully, the kind of apology that comes with real tears and real shame, and I believe she meant every word of it. My father took longer, because admitting he'd chosen to believe his son over his daughter without a shred of real evidence was, I think, harder for him than admitting anything else in his life. But he got there too, eventually, in his own quiet, stiff way. Caleb never really did. He agreed to pay the money back in installments, which he is technically still doing. But in the weeks after the truth came out, I started noticing something that unsettled me more than the theft itself. My parents began treating his lie the way people treat a mistake, something regrettable but understandable, a young man who got in over his head. They treated my 4 months of exile the same way, a misunderstanding, something unfortunate that happened, rather than something they chose to do to me. Nobody suggested Caleb should live somewhere else for a while until trust was rebuilt. Nobody locked their office door around him. Within 2 months, he was back to eating dinner at that table as nothing had happened, and I was the one sitting there feeling like a guest in a house I used to call home, watching my parents laugh at his jokes again like the last 4 months had been a weather event instead of a decision they made. I asked my mother about it once, carefully, not wanting to reopen a wound that seemed to be closing for everyone but me. I asked why Caleb got to come back so easily when I'd had to fight, with actual video evidence, just to be believed in the first place. She didn't have a good answer. She said something about him being fragile, about the gambling being an illness, about wanting to keep the family together. All of it might even be true. None of it explained why fragility earned him forgiveness, while my simple honesty had earned me a duffel bag and an air mattress for 4 months. I moved back in eventually, because I couldn't afford to, and because some stubborn part of me wasn't ready to give up on the idea of us being a family again. But something had shifted permanently, the kind of shift you can't undo with an apology, no matter how sincere. I check locks now that I never used to think about. I keep copies of important documents somewhere Caleb doesn't know exists. I love my brother, and I do not trust him, and I've had to learn to hold both of those things in my hands at the same time without dropping either one. The tuition money eventually got repaid, most of it, enough that I could start classes again a year later than planned. My grandmother never found out the full story before she passed. My mother decided some truths weren't worth the pain of telling an 86-year-old woman that her inheritance had funded her grandson's gambling debt instead of her granddaughter's education. I've never fully decided whether I agree with that choice, or whether it was just one more instance of our family choosing the comfortable lie over the difficult truth. Mrs. Halloway still has that doorbell camera pointed at our shared driveway. I wave at it sometimes, half joking, the way you'd wave at an old friend who happened to save your life without ever knowing they did it. She has no idea what her towels being stolen 4 months earlier ended up uncovering. I've never told her. Some debts, I've realized, don't get repaid in ways the person who's owed will ever see. I think about that garage conversation with Caleb more than almost anything else from that year. The way he said, "I can't control what Mom and Dad think," when what he actually meant was, "I won't stop them from thinking it because it protects me." I think about how easy it was for him to let it happen, and how much harder my parents made me work to undo it, and how, even after everything, they still found a softer landing for him than they ever offered me. My father and I are close again now, closer in some ways than we were before, because I think the guilt of what he did rearranged something in how he shows up for me. My mother and I talk almost every day. Caleb and I are polite. We are not what we were, and I don't know if we ever will be again, and some days that's a grief I carry, and other days it feels like the most honest thing left standing in our family. People ask me sometimes if I've forgiven him. I usually just tell them the truth got recovered, but something else didn't, and I'm still not sure that thing has a name. So here's what I want to leave you with, because I think it matters more than the twist itself. My parents chose to believe the son who lied smoothly over the daughter who told the truth clumsily, simply because he was more comfortable to believe. When the truth came out, they forgave him faster and more completely than they ever apologized to me. If someone in your own family did what my parents did, chose comfort over evidence, chose their favorite over their fairness, and then asked you to just move forward like nothing happened once the truth finally surfaced, would you owe them the same easy forgiveness they gave the person who actually did it?